Do you have somebody in your life? Maybe you're starting to date them, or perhaps they're already an existing romantic partner, or even just a family member or friend who you think may be an avoidant attachment style, and you're noticing that difficulty that's stopping you from more deeply connecting, probably because they're quite mysterious or they tend to have big walls up. Well, if this is something you're experiencing in today's video, we are going to talk about how to bypass an avoidance defense mechanisms in order to deeply connect. And my hope for you is that you'll walk away from this video understanding exactly what those barriers are for connection, but also how you can address them in a healthy way that's also mindful and respectful of the avoidant to get past those walls and form a deeper bond and connection. Now, if you're new to this channel, my name is Thais. I'm really excited that you're here and grateful that you stopped by. And I put daily content out here all about the subconscious mind, attachment styles, and how to really build the best relationships of our life by first learning how to heal and build the best relationship possible to ourselves. Obviously, a huge part of really connecting with a dismissive avoidant isn't just like connecting with some of their character traits at a high level here and like being mindful of some of these patterns. It's also really knowing the things that are going to land poorly and sting or really affect them and do harm to the relationship as a result. Now, um, part of why we have to talk about this in so much detail as well is because dismissive avoidants are so good at like being, like stone facing through things, like showing no weakness, showing no feelings, that oftentimes you'll have no idea that you're even affecting them. Mm. So when it comes to this, one of the first things that you want to make sure that you're very mindful of is how much and how often the way you communicate to a dismissive avoidant is going to feel like criticism. Like dismissive avoidance truly, they feel, and I've like been shocked over the years when I met with more and more and more people who are DAs. But they'll take really small things as criticisms the vast majority of the time. If you say I need more time together, they may take that as a criticism, like, oh, you think I'm not doing enough. Or rather than it just being like a need and just a request, which is like we have to be able to request it from each other in the name of like doing healthy relationships. And we're not supposed to know each other's needs. We're only really going to arrive there when it comes to different needs through communicating about them. So, like, usually, like securely attached people talk about their needs and they don't always know each other's needs, right? Like the vast majority of the time they don't. So that's like a normal, healthy thing. It never makes somebody bad or wrong or shameful if you had to communicate a need. But I will tell you, dismissive avoidants don't usually feel that way. They do usually feel like I'm bad or I'm wrong. Now, here's why. Remember a moment ago, we were talking about how a lot of dismissive avoidance, when I started asking questions more, they would be like, I don't know how to do it, or I feel incapable. Oftentimes, because they're carrying that deep inner feeling about themselves, as soon as they hear a need, it seems to reinforce that big set of fears or wounds. And so, to be able to have a dialogue and to be able to say, like, what you need, you want to handle these things with a lot of extra care. So we want to avoid shame wounds. One of the easiest ways is just start off by saying things that you do care about and value and appreciate, and then say, and here's what I need. And then maybe even end with something else where you can say something you care or value or appreciate. And the more you do that, the less it's going to be received as criticism. And also the more you can talk about like and normalize as a standard with your partner or loved one, because it can be a family member or anything here too. But the more you say, hey, we're not supposed to know each other's needs. It's not, we're not supposed to mind read each other. We're supposed to talk. Like we're supposed to get good at expressing what we need from each other. That's actually how a healthy relationship works and evolves and stays growing together instead of growing apart. And the more we normalize it, the more we can then communicate openly about those things. Because sometimes instead, you might communicate and say, like, I need you to talk on the phone more, or I need you to, whatever the need is. And the DA will often right away be like, you want things from me and you think I'm not doing a good job and you think I'm incapable. And they tend to really take things personally. And honestly, this happens with DAs in the workplace. This happens with DAs really in a lot of different places in their lives. And again, we take things personally the more neglect we have as a general rule in our upbringing. So that is a very, very important thing. And just knowing how to phrase your communication so you're not going to shame somebody for something or make them feel shame. And again, it's not that you are making them feel shame, it's that you might be handling communication less than optimally, but then they really take it personally and the combination of those things is what creates that big feeling of shame. But just the more mindful you are, the better. Another big thing is I know for a lot of FAs in here, and sometimes APs too. Sometimes you think, and I'll just speak from personal experience. Like I thought growing up, because I saw my parents fighting like cats and dogs all the time. I thought growing up that like that's what love is. Like that's how people are in relationships. They fight like crazy. That's love. So when I look back until I did a lot of healing and self work, when I look back at like these early relationships in my life, like mind you, I was like a teenager at the time, but, like, I would pick fights because I thought that, like, "Hey, this is how we know we're in a passionate, connected relationship." And so if I thought that things were too normal, I would be like, "Oh my gosh, the relationship's fading, it's dying out, the connection is over." And so, you know, so a big learning for me was, "Oh, that's definitely not how other people feel." And I can tell you who feels like that the least, and it's dismissive avoidance. Nobody is going to want to get away from that situation more than a dismissive avoidant because fighting, drama, conflict, it really terrifies them deep down. Like dismissive avoidants are really generally super highly uncomfortable in conflict oriented situations. They didn't have that model to them. It's not part of their subconscious comfort zone. It doesn't feel safe. They don't feel empowered to know how to work through conflict. And they tend to go into like survival mode and then feel like their needs are not met. So it's really important to recognize, hey, that's not necessarily um, oh, the Real Housewives lousy programming. That was funny. It's true. Yeah, and sun says they freeze, right? Like, and that tends to be a big sort of normal space for DAs that kind of go into freeze mode. And it's honestly like a bit of a trauma response. So yeah, and I hear this too, right? The moment someone shouts at me, I shut down hard. Dismissive, like securely attached people don't like that. But dismissive avoidance, like it will make them want to run the other way. Like it really causes this super uncomfortable situation. So it triggers this wound of like, I am unsafe. And like, we don't like to be around things where we truly feel unsafe. So being mindful of that is huge. Another big thing is feeling trapped scares dismissive avoidance a lot. So like sometimes if you're asking for something that you need, or maybe you're dating somebody and you like want a commitment, right? What we don't want to do is put people in like pigeonholed situations. So maybe you've been dating a DA for let's say 3 months. And let's say that you want a commitment, you want to know. Maybe you don't, generally people commit around 3, 4 months, securely attached people. Sometimes a little longer, sometimes a little shorter, depending on circumstances. Like, were they friends first? Have they known each other for a long time? Different things will vary, like create a variation of that dynamic. So let's say you're at like 2 or 3 months and you are wanting that commitment. So then if you're in that position, you don't want to have conversations like this. And this is one example of many examples, but you don't want to have a conversation that says like, what are we? Are we committed? Because it puts this sense of like, I need the answer right now. It almost gives this like air of an ultimatum. Instead, you want to have conversations that are like, hey, I'm really enjoying this relationship. I'm really enjoying how things are going. I could definitely see this turning into something. It doesn't have to be immediate, but I do need to know that, my time is valuable. And for me to be investing my time, I want to know that you're on the same page and also see a strong future. So, like, conversations like that tend to bode a lot better. And this can come across in a variety of different ways, right? It can be conversations about moving in together, buying a house, where you're going to live, like whatever it is, rather than saying, are we going to live here? Are we going to move in? Are we? Because there's this sense of like, I need to know right now. You need to tell me immediately. So instead of going through that dynamic, having more of this kind of open ended conversation, but that you still get your needs met for certainty. Like, I need to know that we're on the same page. I need to know that we're moving in the same direction. I do need to know that this will come about. It doesn't have to be this second, but I need to know that we're going there. Doing things like that allow to have, important commitment based conversations without the like trapping nature of how those conversations can come across. Right. Again, like, I'll say this throughout this whole presentation over and over again. This isn't about doing backflips to like appease the other person. This is about knowing how you're most likely to get your needs met while connecting to them and being able to be mindful and considerate of some of their different wounds and fears. Other really important things related to core wounds. Um, When dismissive avoidants do something and they do make an effort, acknowledge it, see it, pay attention to it, honor it, appreciate it. It doesn't have to be over the top, but just like even just mentioning, hey, I see you're putting in an effort. I appreciate it. I've never seen any other attachment style respond so well to positive reinforcement of needs, better than any other attachment style by leaps and bounds. And I think it's because it inherently gets them out of this mindset or belief sort of way that they're living that thinks, oh my gosh, I'm not capable of doing this. I'm not good at doing relationships. I'm not capable at doing relationships. Every time you say, hey, I see you're trying, I know you're making an effort, I notice it, thank you. Every time you do that, it gets them around that belief about themselves, which is a huge saboteur in relationships. And on top of that, it makes them feel the opposite of shame. It makes them feel, pride and supported, and it makes them see that them opening up is doing good and not bad, because making an effort in a relationship is inherently vulnerable, right? And like who who hates vulnerability the most is our DAs. So when they're doing something vulnerable, when there's a little bit of positive reinforcement, that ends up being a fantastic thing. Also, hello to so many returning faces. It's nice to see everybody. I keep seeing little faces pop in. I'm like, oh hi. The more we're doing these things, the better. It makes a huge difference. Other really important place to acknowledge is when and if a dismissive avoidant does open up, right? They're not going to like, you're not going to sit down on date number 7 and they're going to tell you their whole life story. They'll open up a little bit over time, but acknowledging that, doing things to support that, right? So saying things like, hey, like that was really courageous to share that, or little tiny things, even that might be a little bit too strong. But just validating like their feelings, their perspective when they do open up goes a very, very long way. And funnily enough, dismissive avoidants don't love when you try to solve their problems when they do open up. Similar to all other attachment styles. If you try to solve their problems when they do open up, they I came in and saw Jerry's reaction to that and it made me laugh. But what ends up happening is dismissive avoidance, because it's like these kind of rare occasions when they do open up, they actually usually want you to validate their emotions. Like, oh, I see why that would suck. I see why that hurts to feel that way. I see why, that's an uncomfortable situation. If instead you're like, oh, do this or do this, they tend to receive it as like, oh, you think I can't handle myself. You think that I can't handle my own problems. You're trying to do it for me. So when dismissive avoidance do open up, the more you can, hey, that sucks. Like, I appreciate you sharing that. That's not a very fun thing to be going through. I'm sorry you're going through that. I can see how you would feel hurt or upset. Like, the more you can just do a little bit again. I know that this is so nuanced. And again, your job is not to be like a scientist to remember all these little tiny pieces. But if you overdo the emotional validation for too long, they'll close back down. If you don't validate and you try to solve the problem, they'll close down and they won't open up again. So you have this kind of tricky middle ground where you want to be able to validate a little bit, like, oh, that's a tough situation. Like, I can see why that would feel super uncomfortable. But if you say something like, oh my gosh, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. You must be so hurt and sad and frustrated. And I can't believe, like, if you go on for too long, they're like, okay, you're making me feel too much. I need to close back down again and go back into my safe zone. So, like, having that middle ground of validating, even asking, what is there anything I can do to support you? Is there anything you need from me? Or like, hey, that's amazing that you're sharing that and you were able to go through that and come out the other side of it. If it's something they're sharing about their past, like doing things like that tend to be that really healthy middle ground. So again, I'm going to tell you the goal of this today is to tell you all the information so you can notice what you might be doing. You can take the pieces that apply best to you, but your job is not to like do backflips all the time and remember every single little thing, because then you'll just end up in this like self-abandoned relationship where you're not showing up for your own needs and your own feelings and experiences too. So just being mindful of that throughout today. Another big thing is dismissive avoidants generally have this huge idea that when they do open up or they are expressing emotion in any way, that it makes them like weak, super weak. The more we can oppose that, hey, it's strong, the more we can talk about, like, hey, it's actually really strong and courageous when people open up. Like, look at our world today. The whole world is designed to like not get you to open up and to scare us out of like opening up and being vulnerable. And so the more that we actually do that, the more courageous that is. Even if you just share that from your own experience, your own belief system, your own example, then that's a great place to start, just so that if that person then opens up to you, they already know that you're not going to judge them as being weak. You're going to see them through the lens of being strong. So that tends to be a huge plus as well, and something good to pay attention to. They tend to have a sensitivity towards being helpless or powerless. So the more that you can encourage them, like the opposite of helplessness is either supported or empowered, right? And we can sort of have empowered for the opposite of powerless. And so the more that like we can feed into that in conversations, if they're going to have to rely on you for something, letting them know that you'll be there to support them in the process, things like that, so that it just we know how to in conversation bypass some of these core wounds. Again, dismissive avoidance, or ideally they're working through their own core wounds, things like that. But the more we know, the easier it is to consider somebody else.